The desert heat had already begun to rise by the time the first siren split the morning air, long and metallic, like pressure venting from the sky itself. On the tarmac, the scramble unfolded fast. Boots pounded over cracked asphalt. Crew chiefs shouted over each other and warning lights blinked in clusters across the flight line. F-16s and Raptors were being prepped 2 bays over, their fuselages gleaming beneath the sun. Fuel lines hissed into place while armament teams rolled munitions from steel crates onto angled lifts. From the tower, clipped voices issued alerts at 5-second intervals. The urgency was real. Something was moving out there. Kara sat alone beneath the wing of her A-10 Thunderbolt, tucked under the open shade of its wide gray canopy. The aircraft was cold, no power on, no pre-check crew, just her. Her boots were planted square on the concrete. Her flight harness rested across her lap. Clipped, but not cinched. No headset. No orders. She hadn't been called. She wouldn't be. Not today. A few of the fast jet pilots moved past her bay without slowing. One of them, tall and sharp in a spotless flight suit, glanced her way and grinned at his wingman. His voice carried just loud enough to be heard. He said she was still riding shotgun in the Warthog Museum. The other one laughed and said they ought to use it as a decoy. Neither of them looked at her again. She didn't speak. Behind her, the A-10's fuselage bore sun stains and patch welds that told more history than most of the men running past her. The aircraft had seen real fire, not the virtual stuff on a screen. She ran one glove along the underside of the wing root, checking nothing. It was just habit. A mechanic tossed her an unopened energy drink on his way to another bird. It rolled to a stop by her boot. He didn't say her name. She didn't pick it up. Kara had already heard the mission callouts from the command tent. Names rattled off with urgency and approval. Crew after crew assigned. Her name wasn't on the list. No one had looked her way. The A-10 had been marked standby days ago. A contingency asset in case of mass failure. Not expected. Not prepared. Just marked. She could hear the tower calling airframes over the primary channel. There was tension, already delays. Fault codes. Something about a fuel sensor mismatch. No one was flying yet, but the energy had shifted. She adjusted the strap on her glove. Slow and precise. The air was warming up now, the kind that baked equipment and blurred judgment. Kara stayed still. Her harness clicked once against her side. A group of ground personnel wheeled past with a thermal cart. One nodded to her like she was part of the wall. Another offered a low, amused comment about babysitting legacy hardware. She didn't answer, didn't blink. The A-10 sat still, the same way it always had. Its paint dulled, its engines quiet. It wasn't sleek, it wasn't fast, but it worked. She knew every throttle pull weight by feel, knew how the airframe vibrated before it was fully spooled, knew the teeth in the gun's feed belt by sound. No one had asked her what she knew. The heat shimmered above the concrete, soft and visible like a veil. A red tag dangled from the pitot tube, twisting lazily in the wind. Far down the line, a jet tried to start, then spooled down again. A voice on the ops channel muttered something clipped and frustrated. Someone else barked a confirmation that the Raptors weren't clearing launch. Kara listened without reaction. She opened the pouch on the side of her flight bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a laminated sheet, worn at the edges, clipped at the top. She unfolded it on her knee. Gaiu 8 range table. Hand annotated. The numbers were hers. The wind compensation curve had been adjusted based on last month's drills. Not theory. It wasn't something she needed right now, but she reviewed it slowly, like ritual. Just in case. Her finger traced a line across the elevation drop column. Wind drift at 200 feet. Speed below 300 knots. Margin no more than half a meter. She had walked those numbers in her sleep, marked them in pencil, redrew them in pen. Another group passed behind her. Their boots were loud on the metal grating. One of them said she looked like she was doing math homework. Someone laughed. Kara didn't look up. Her thumb turned the page. The page bore her own notes in blue ink, small adjustments she'd logged after a solo drill 2 months earlier when no one else stayed late. She had tested the gun sight manually, one pass at a rusted-out shell north of range marker 5. No one had tracked the run. She hadn't asked them to. A shadow passed overhead. A drone. Probably. Nothing manned had made it up yet. The concrete beneath her boots was warming fast. She closed the folder and slipped it back into the pouch. Her gloves felt tighter now, not from heat, but from readiness. She leaned once against the aircraft's side panel, not for rest, but to feel the stillness in it, the way it waited without complaint. So did she. The F-16s never made it off the line, one by one. Their startup sequences staggered and failed. Engines spooled, then coughed. HUDs blinked red with warnings faster than ground crews could clear them. A fuel line error flagged across the network just as a radar calibration fault echoed through the tower relay. Over the primary channel, a clipped voice announced, "Hold status for all fast jet assets." The reply was static, and a curse that didn't finish transmitting. Inside the command tent, someone was already calling a systems tech. Too late for launch. The Raptors weren't faring better. Their external diagnostics passed, but the startup protocols hung on subroutine freezes. A tech snapped at someone to reboot a data uplink. Another yelled back that the fleet config was locked. Ground crews moved fast, but not with purpose anymore, more like inertia. Through the angled glass of her cockpit, Kara watched all of it. She adjusted her flight gloves slowly. Each finger was tightened with the same care she'd used on day 1. She rolled her shoulders back into the seat and exhaled through her nose. The A-10 cockpit was dark. No crew had walked her out. No marshaller. No nod. Her canopy hadn't been clipped. It didn't matter. She knew every inch of this bird. No prep crew could tell her what she hadn't already memorized. Her palms settled against the dash for just a moment, not for calibration, but acknowledgement. Then she began. Battery on, inverter up, fuel prime switch 1, then 2, crossfeed armed, APU start. The aircraft remained still, but the air changed. A pressure shift. A sound behind the sound, the kind of quiet that carries tension in its back. Her gloves creaked faintly against the switches. Not new gloves, not fancy, just worn in the right way. She reached overhead and unlocked the throttle guard. It moved smoothly. No grind. One click forward. No hesitation. The checklist played in her head. She didn't need a clipboard. Not anymore. Stall strip visual confirmed. Stick neutral. Flap gauge at 3 degrees down. Trim tab locked. Canopy seal unbroken. Rudder pedal float checked. From the far bay, a pilot cursed. One of the Raptors had kicked into emergency shutdown. Another ground call crackled on the open channel. The voice was dry and clipped. Negative launch, no ready birds. Repeat, no air asset cleared. There was silence after that. Then another voice, quieter, unofficial, muttered through an open mic. We're blind and grounded. Kara's left hand reached for the oxygen mask. She unhooked it but left it coiled by the panel. No rush. She clipped the harness line across her chest and tightened the belt. She adjusted nothing twice. She never had to. The fire control panel came alive with a muted hum. The display read clean. She opened the weapons profile and loaded the GAU-8 configuration. Ammo count confirmed full. Loadout indicators green. Safety on. She checked the reticle calibration against her saved range profile. 100.0% match. The wind outside rattled faintly against the canopy, a dry edge to the quiet. Kara's thumb hovered over the master arm switch. She didn't move yet. She looked out across the bay. The line of jets beyond her sat in silence. Nothing was clearing the pad. Command had stopped shouting. No one was watching her. There was no approval to wait for, and no denial either. Just sky and time and this aircraft ready. She flipped the switch. Master arm engaged. There was no sound when it happened, just a light, a readiness signal. Nothing else had changed, but everything had. The APU settled into rhythm behind her, the tone smoothing out into a steady pulse. The aircraft didn't shudder. It didn't groan. It accepted the decision. She rested her fingers against the starter. Not quite pressing. Not quite waiting. Another jet tried to launch down the line, but the spool whined out early and shut down. Nothing manned was going up. A drone buzzed overhead, small and watching, indifferent. Inside her headset, Kara listened one last time. The tower was quiet. She pressed the starter. The radar feed inside the command tent pulsed red in short intervals, steady and unwelcome. A fresh return blinked onto the screen, then another, then a third, each one lower on the map than the last. A red tracking line thickened, tagged with over 40 moving units, sweeping in from the southeast shelf. The armor column had cleared the ridgeline and dropped into the valley 10 minutes ahead of schedule. No radio chatter, no visual confirmation, just dust trails and thermal spikes. A captain stepped closer, narrowing his eyes. They bypassed the canyon. A junior tech scrolled through the return data. Confirmed. They came straight down the shale flats. That's not on the route plan. Another officer leaned over the console. Speed. Main columns at 42 kilometers per hour. Lead vehicles advancing at 50. A second tech added, 8 armored hulls, tanks. They're heading straight for the corridor checkpoint. The room shifted. The air felt tighter. The operations chief turned to the flight control display. Where are my jets? The controller hesitated, still grounded. What about Echo Team? Hydraulics red-tagged, avionics faulted on power-up. Raptors, grounded during pre-flight. The ops chief stepped back. What about anything I want one aircraft in the air? A different controller shook her head. We've got no cleared birds, no flight-ready crews, 0 assets launched. The silence after that was immediate. A screen beeped in the corner. No one answered it. Someone muttered, "We're blind." But not entirely. Down on the line, a low hum broke the quiet. The A-10 Thunderbolt rolled forward, slow and deliberate. Its taxi lights flicked on, engines warm. No tow team in sight, no visible comms, just movement. Inside the tower, a radio tech leaned into his mic. Juliet 3, hold position. I say again, hold. No reply. In the tent, the controller closest to the window raised a hand. Someone just left pad 12. Unscheduled. The ops chief leaned toward the screen. Which call sign? Unknown? Looks like standby aircraft. A second tech checked the roster, voice uncertain. That's Kara. That's the standby pilot. Someone turned sharply. She wasn't cleared. She wasn't briefed. Well, she's moving. Inside the cockpit, Kara didn't touch the radio. She didn't look toward the tower. She rested her left hand on the throttle, right hand on the stick. Her headset sat idle on the dash, coiled and quiet. The canopy had sealed shut behind her. She flew alone. Outside, ground crews had stopped moving. A crew chief near pad 9 stepped back from his rig, eyes narrowing. A weapons tech tilted his head and whispered, "She's actually going." In the command tent, voices collided. She doesn't have launch clearance. She's not in the mission stack. Someone stop her. No one moved. The A-10 crept down the edge of the taxiway, past grounded jets with red flags clipped to their intake ports. No one stood in her path. No one waved her off. One technician started forward, then stopped, unsure. On the radar screen, the enemy column advanced another full grid square. Inside the cockpit, Kara's engine gauges read smooth and even. Elevation low, temp steady, fuel reserve optimal. The fire control panel was armed and silent. She didn't flinch. A voice burst through the tower frequency. Juliet 3, this is command. Abort. You are not cleared. Do not proceed. Kara reached over and pulled the throttle slightly forward. No answer. The tower repeated, louder, Juliet 3. Do you copy return to ramp immediately? Still no response. A third voice came on, harsher and clipped. Kara, if you're hearing this, you're violating direct airspace control. This is your final warning. Nothing changed. The A-10 reached the end of the runway. The concrete ahead shimmered in the heat, open and bare. A drone passed overhead, catching the shape of the jet from above, old, angular, unpainted except for stenciled serials. The last gun up. In the tent, a major turned away from the screen and muttered, "She's going anyway." The ops chief's voice lowered. "She's already gone." Kara pushed the throttle forward. The aircraft roared, and she left the ground. Kara kept the A-10 low, letting the earth move beneath her like a slow, unfolding current. The scrub terrain blurred past in layered bands of shadow and grit. She flew nap of earth, no more than a few dozen meters above the surface, banking gently to track every fold in the land. Not fast, not loud. The throttle held steady beneath her palm. Speed was not the point. Stability was. Every twitch of the yoke mattered. Each pitch adjustment came from muscle memory, not calculation. She followed the contours as if she'd memorized them, because she had. There was no support uplink, no airborne radar sweep, no voice in her ear feeding her headings, just the weight of the cockpit, the muted hum of the control surfaces, and the desert stretching wide below. Visual navigation. That was it. Heat, dust, pattern, instinct. She rolled left, dipping under a rocky outcrop. The landscape opened briefly, a plateau scarred with track lines, then closed again into another shallow valley. The wind shifted crosswise, buffeting her wings for 2 seconds before settling. She didn't react. She knew this route. She'd flown it in silence, after hours, simulating what no one expected her to do for real. A flicker of motion caught her eye. Dust lifted in 3 small plumes beyond a canyon lip. Not a storm. Not random. The spacing was too even. She checked her heading and adjusted 5 degrees right. She didn't speed up. She just dropped 5 meters lower. As she came around the next bend, the line came into view. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just the unmistakable geometry of armor. Shapes too flat, too regular, too still. 8 main battle tanks, spaced with precision. Behind them, 5 personnel carriers and a single mobile command unit flanked by a fuel truck. The formation moved, in a staggered wedge, hugging a stone rise to limit their exposure. But the desert betrayed them. The sun reflected off the command unit's hatch just enough to give them away. Kara shifted her weight forward slightly, hands still light on the controls. The A-10 felt calm beneath her. Old, yes. Heavy, but cooperative. The aircraft wanted clarity. She gave it. The HUD flickered into readiness mode. She didn't glance directly at it. Her focus stayed ahead, but the reticle began to bloom in her peripheral view. She flipped the manual range control and brought it center. The sight ring floated, then anchored. She came off the sun vector, sliding diagonally to reduce glare. The tank slowed, likely reassessing terrain before their next push. That pause would be the opening. She knew the column wouldn't stop for long. Their objective was time-based. If she missed the first vehicle, the entire run would collapse. She wasn't going to miss. 400 feet, airspeed holding at 270 knots. Target lead vehicle, largest profile, greatest disruption potential. She drew in one breath, shallow and even, adjusted pitch by 2 notches. The ring steadied. Her left hand hovered over the trigger. Then came the moment. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. She squeezed. The Gu-8 cannon spoke in a tone older than words. Not a blast, not a burst. A mechanical thunder, rolling low and furious. The nose of the A-10 dipped slightly with each round. The aircraft shuddered under recoil, its frame absorbing force the way mountains hold rain. The entire body of the jet vibrated not violently, but completely, as if it were joining the act. The rounds tore forward, 7 barrels rotating in perfect harmony. The sound became rhythm. The casing ejection clanged behind her in sharp staccato. Brass fell in a trail, each shell glinting in the sun before vanishing below. Impact followed. The lead tank didn't explode. It failed. The armor at the nose caved inward like paper soaked in water. The treads buckled. The vehicle twisted left, collapsing into its own shadow. Smoke rose, but no fire caught. The machine just stopped, its purpose ended in one continuous decision. Kara held the trigger for exactly 2 seconds, then released. She didn't circle, didn't confirm. That wasn't the job. The aircraft pulled up gently. No wobble, no overcorrection. The throttle stayed level as she banked to exit vector. She didn't speak, didn't wait for analysis. Behind her, dust swirled in a slow, rising wall. The remaining column had stopped moving. The landscape widened beneath her. The canyons stretched like quiet testimony. Nothing followed. No missiles. No alerts. Just the sound of her engine and the long shadow of what she'd just done. She leveled out at 600 feet. The altitude gave her a view of the line from a distance, frozen, uncertain. One tank down, the rest behind it. She watched without emotion. They wouldn't push now. The formation had lost momentum. That was enough. The GAU-8 status light still blinked green. She toggled it off. Master arm disengaged. The cockpit felt warm now, not from heat, but from purpose completed. No one else had fired. She didn't know if the base had even realized what she'd done. Didn't care. The shot had been hers. It would not be repeated. The desert spread ahead, dry and endless. She flew toward it with no change in posture, no shift in breath. The sky accepted her without sound. Inside the command tent, no one spoke. The radar screen blinked quietly in the center of the table, its lines pulsing in intervals that felt longer than they were. One red tag had stopped moving. The lead marker on the armor column was frozen in place. Data line, inactive. Across the room, the overhead fan turned with a low mechanical whine that suddenly felt too loud. A technician leaned in, ran the track again, then once more for confirmation. He looked up. Target Alpha halted. No change in velocity. A captain turned from the window. Did they hit terrain? Negative. Flat surface. No reason for a stall. From a portable field radio on the back shelf, a voice came through, staticky but clear. It was a forward observer posted along the canyon rim. One hit, clean. They stopped. The room shifted. Someone reached for the mission logbook. Another scanned the flight status board. Pages flipped. Monitors refreshed. A controller checked the launch manifest and frowned. There's no airframe listed in strike position. We didn't put anyone in that corridor. But they got hit. Someone said, "We just heard it." No strike was authorized. Another voice said, "We've got 0 aircraft on record over that approach path." A young officer stepped forward, voice uncertain. If no one was in the air, then who fired? Silence returned, this time sharper. Then a technician at the rear of the tent turned a display around. Drone feed just came in. Rolling playback. Time index matches observer report. The screen showed thermal footage. A flat plain of open desert, scored with track lines. Then a flicker movement low on the right. A shape entered frame. Blocky. Slow. No call sign data. Just a silhouette. It flew low, barely above the terrain. The approach was deliberate. The thermal signature pulsed once as the weapon fired. One long burst. The lead tank twisted mid-frame, its front hull folding inward like crumpled tin. No flame, no explosion, just collapse. Dust rose in a long spiral, caught in the heat wake. The aircraft pulled away, banking gently left. Then it vanished out of frame. The feed looped. No one said anything. After a few seconds, a crew chief at the edge of the tent pointed at the paused frame. "That's an A-10. I know that engine wash anywhere." Another leaned closer. "That's Juliet 3. Look at the tail angle. No mistaking it." She wasn't cleared to launch, someone else said quietly. She wasn't even on the flight docket. But she went. The first replied, "In the tower." A controller confirmed. Single aircraft on return vector, heading back to pad 12. The ops chief crossed his arms. No comms. No transmission. She didn't call out. She's flying dark. Outside, word had already started to spread. From the tower steps to the refuel bay, personnel began drifting toward the edge of the flight line. Some held their radios. Others stood with hands on their hips, squinting toward the far ridgeline. The heat made the distance shimmer betraying. But above the horizon, a thin coil of smoke twisted into the sky. Someone pointed. There, that's where it happened. No one spoke for a long time. Back inside the tent, the footage played again. One burst, one vehicle destroyed. No second pass, no chase. Just precision. One act, executed in silence. A logistics officer leaned against the table, staring at the thermal feed. She didn't overshoot. Didn't double back. She didn't need to, the captain muttered. She got the one that mattered. The ops chief's voice was quiet now. She went without orders. We can't let that slide. But someone else, a quiet operator who rarely spoke, said calmly. She also stopped the column. The chief looked over. You don't know that yet. She disrupted momentum. That's enough to buy time. Across the tent, a technician reopened the sortie logs. She didn't even assign a call sign. Just started her bird and left. A young enlisted crew member, barely out of training, watched the screen. They said she was standby. Another answered, not anymore. The tent emptied slowly. One by one. The staff moved outside. No formal announcement had been made, but word had reached every bay by then. Even the refuel crews paused what they were doing. The A-10 came into view a few minutes later, low and level, its profile growing against the horizon. The drone camera caught its approach from the rear single-engine tone, slightly trailing smoke from its heat vent. The wings rode flat. No sign of urgency. She was coming home at a steady pace, neither rushing nor delaying. Down on the tarmac, the only sound was the wind. One of the comm techs removed his headset. Still no radio contact. Another added, she hasn't said a word since liftoff. The radar screen beeped softly as Juliet 3 crossed into final approach range. A mechanic looked up from his spot near the hose rigs. Is she even going to land? No one answered. They just watched. The damaged lead tank on the ridgeline hadn't moved. Drones confirmed the rest of the column was still stalled behind it, adjusting formation but not advancing. A major finally broke the quiet. She didn't just fire, she made a decision we didn't. Someone near the edge of the flight line nodded slowly. That wasn't rogue. That was responsibility. A pause followed. Then another voice, older, gravel in the tone, said what no one else had yet. That was Kara, and that was all they said. The A-10 dipped once and leveled. The landing gear locked into place. The base held its breath. The A-10 touched down with no fanfare, no call-outs, no tower instructions, just wheels on concrete and a canopy of dry sky above. Kara brought it in clean, riding the center line with the throttle firm in her palm. There was no jolt, no flare, just the simple contact of rubber and runway, and the long sigh of air brakes settling. Her radio remained silent. She hadn't keyed it on the approach, hadn't acknowledged tower, hadn't needed to. Down the flight line, two crew chiefs stood at the edge of a Raptor bay. One raised his hand halfway, as if unsure whether to wave her in or wave her off. The other just stared, his headset dangling loose around his neck. The A-10 rolled past both of them without slowing. She taxied back to pad 12, the same concrete pad where she had sat ignored that morning. Nothing about the space had changed. The same half-curled hose lay against the corner post. The same sun glare hit the forward panels in the same way. But this time, the aircraft returned warm. The metal hummed as it coasted to a stop. The whine of the turbines faded with finality. The canopy lifted. Still, no one approached. Inside the command tent, voices overlapped. She had no clearance. That's not a gray area. She bypassed air control, violated protocol, and stopped the lead tank with a single run. That doesn't excuse it. A new voice entered the mix, quiet but grounded. One of the field team liaisons leaned forward, earpiece still active. We just got confirmation from Echo Ridge. Whoever made that pass disrupted the armor push. They're stalled. Infantry regrouped. Evac is secured. That cut the room. For a full 10 seconds, no one replied. Then someone near the operations board muttered, "She wasn't assigned, but she showed up anyway." Outside, Kara unhooked her harness with slow, even movements. She reached up and pulled the helmet free, then paused to rest it on the seat beside her. Her gloves creaked faintly as she rotated her wrists, stiffness returning as adrenaline faded. The air inside the cockpit had gone still. The ladder lowered itself. She stepped down without hesitation, boots hitting the pad with that familiar solid thud. No one met her at the base of the aircraft. The marshaller had never come out. She didn't wait. As she crossed the tarmac, people began to emerge. A crew from the fueling station leaned against a trailer. A pair of ground techs paused beside a tow vehicle. Further down, a young logistics specialist squinted toward her and whispered, "That's her, isn't it?" The one beside him nodded. "That's her." Kara didn't respond. Her face was calm, unreadable. She walked with the same pace she always had. Nothing hurried, nothing for show. The only sound was the scrape of her boots on pavement. She passed the hangar bay where two officers stood in quiet argument. One of them stepped forward as she approached. "You weren't cleared," he said. Before she could answer, another voice spoke from behind him. "She didn't wait to be..." That ended it. Kara gave no reply. Her eyes passed over the group but landed on no one. She adjusted the collar of her flight suit, then continued past them without a word. Inside the auxiliary ready room, the lights were off. A fan buzzed faintly in the ceiling, pushing warm air in slow circles. She moved to her locker, unzipped her flight bag, and pulled out the same laminated range sheet she had studied that morning. The GAU-8 range table was creased now, but intact. Her notes wind drift, compensation margins, recoil bracket spacing remained smudged but legible. She refolded it carefully, the way one might fold a flag or a letter. Then she placed it back into the pouch. Same pocket, same angle. Her fingers lingered for one breath. No ceremony, no announcement. She closed the locker. Outside, more personnel had gathered. No one spoke loudly, but their eyes had already shifted from questions to something quieter. They watched her walk. They watched without instruction. In the tower, someone finally said it aloud. She landed without needing to. A second voice replied, almost to himself. She already said what she came to say. Back inside. Kara sat down on the bench beside her gear. Her helmet rested on her left, her gloves on her right. She looked straight ahead, shoulders relaxed. No apology, no pride, just stillness. And for the first time all day, she let herself stop. She was never chosen, not called, not briefed, not cleared, but she was ready. While others waited for orders, she acted, alone, uncelebrated, and unseen until the moment her choice reshaped everything around her. Kara's story reminds us that worth isn't granted by permission. It's revealed in stillness, in skill, and in doing the hard thing when no one's watching. There was no applause when she landed, no ceremony, just quiet recognition, the kind that lingers after the sound fades. Sometimes, strength speaks loudest in silence. If that stayed with you, take a moment to reflect. What does it mean to be ready, even when no one calls your name? Share your thoughts in the comments, or follow for more stories that honor quiet resolve, unseen action, and the courage it takes to act alone.